Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Aruna Natarajan. I'm part of the GroupM team. I'm Chief Client Officer for one of the GroupM agencies, EssenceMediacom, based out of the US. And a big thank you to the World Women Foundation for giving us the stage to discuss this really interesting topic, the opportunity in women's sports for brands and marketers. And as we think about investing in this space, the potential we can unlock for these brands. Thank you all very much for being here today. I am joined by three marketers who have done exceptional work in this space with their companies, with their brands, and I'm hoping that today they can share a little bit with us about the journey that they have taken with women's sports and the opportunity that they see ahead as we elevate this conversation. I think every year as we come to Cannes, we have these discussions, we attend a number of sessions, and we see certain topics bubble to the top. I think I can definitely say that this is a year where women's sports and the opportunity there is right up there with AI, and I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation. So let's start with a few introductions, perhaps. We have represented on the stage Tom from National Australia Bank, Kat from Unilever, and Bridget from Ally. But I'd love for each of you to maybe introduce yourselves a little, tell us a bit about your background and your current role. And in keeping with the topic for today, what is the sport you grew up playing, watching, which started your love fest with the space?
Hi, I'm Tom Dobson. I'm the executive of Group Marketing. National Australia Bank is one of the big four in Australia. There are big four banks. There's a couple of Australians in the room. I'll get this right. Big financial services group for Australia and New Zealand. And we're a key sponsor of, we'll get to that, with the Australian Football League women's competition. I think I didn't do much team sport. I had too many part-time jobs, but cycling and squash were my young, which is good because I can run now. All my friends who played a little too much team sport have got the knee problems, which I don't have.
Kat?
Hi, so I'm Kath Swallow. I'm here from Unilever. So I'm a global brand vice president, currently looking after Rexona, who some of you might know as Shaw, Degree, Shield, if you're from South Africa. I mean, multiple names. But also I look after a lot of the new sports partnerships that we've taken on. When sport became important for me was actually, I would say more recently in the last 5 years. I'm a mum of 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. And I think probably one positive, I would say, massive positive, is seeing the power that it has on their confidence, but also on the ability to play in a team. And kind of, you can see future leaders coming in that way. On the flip side, I see both sides of the coin, having a son and 2 daughters, and the difference in the opportunities they get even at a young age. I was joking this morning saying that, even the football team names are different. So my daughter's teams are called the Diamonds and the Pearls, and my son is the Giants. It kind of says it all. So you can really see this happening at a young age, which then makes me, much more sort of with a level of conviction to drive this change.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bridget Sponsky. I'm the executive over at Ally, overseeing all of our brand work and our sponsorship work. And a funny story, I came over to Ally 16 years ago in the effort to actually rebrand the company. So we were 100 years old. We were formerly General Motors Acceptance Corporation, so a B2B indirect automotive dealer lender, and rebranded our business model and, kind of was charged with lighting the brand on fire. And 16 years later, here we are. So it's pretty exciting to see. But I grew up playing sports. I was actually a competitive cheerleader, a base, of course, and also played softball, third baseman. So, grew up playing those sports, but grew up watching sports and, mostly baseball and probably football. I'm Detroit-based, Detroit native, so Tigers and Lions. But from a women's perspective, there wasn't a whole lot to follow. And I grew up really kind of anxious every 4 years for the Olympics to come around, because that's when I could watch the Kim Zemeskals and the Shannon Millers and, the female gymnasts, kind of, be the star of the show. And that's who I kind of followed and emulated. But, I've always been a proponent for women's sports, and it's not new. It's just, the lack of coverage is also, hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that today.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And you spoke about, all of you spoke about kind of the journey you've taken through life, right? And with women's sports as well, it has been a journey for your brands. So when we had our discussions earlier about the work that you've done, I'd love to back up a little bit and start about, as an organization, if you think about your brands as a marketer, when did you first start to realize the opportunity that there was within women's sports? And were there any specific trigger moments or milestones that kind of brought it from an afterthought or the sidelines to the main stage?
Should I start? Does everyone know what Australian rules football is in this room? Okay, getting a few nods. Those who don't, so imagine a sport played on a cricket field, if you know what cricket is, a large field with a football that's like a rugby ball or an NFL ball, with players who've got, say, basketball skills, aerial skills and kicking skills and marking skills. And it's very fast paced and at 360 degrees, and the aim is to kick the ball into 2 goals at the end of the ground. And women have actually been playing, it's sort of an indigenous game to Australia. Women have been playing this for a long time, but there has not been an elite competition. So women and girls hung up their boots, so to speak, sort of around age 12. What happened about in 2017, the launch of an elite league was brought forward by years by the headquarters, and we'd been a sponsor of the AFL for about 20 years, especially Auskick as a junior program, and we'd been a sponsor of some of their assets, so it was a no-brainer. It was brought to us first, and we were with the naming. It wasn't about equality, equity, or anything like that. It was actually just made good business sense, because what we were offered is the opportunity to put our name to something that was going to grow. By nature, it was going to have this growth trajectory, starting with 8 teams and going to 18. So it was the right thing to do. And what we found, and we'll get into some of this, but it's a completely different, it's run very differently. These female athletes, because they didn't have they've got careers. They're much more educated. There aren't any male athletes in the room, but some of in general, a lot of the young men who come into it have been told from age 10 or 11 that you're treated like God. You're going right through this thing. And the women, because they'd had to focus on having careers, there are players who are midwives who are milking cows at 4 a.m, then driving hours to training. It's just a richer storytelling, and we can talk about the advantage of that. But it was a no-brainer. And also, like Kath said, my daughter started playing, and in the early years, this is before the game started, it was a mixed team. So boys and girls, when they're young, boys and girls are very similar. And they played in a mixed team, but girls are very good at mobilising. They've mobilised a whole group, and they had a whole female team within a couple of years. And now there's just a huge growth in it. But to start from a mixed team and then play, because the physicality, as you go from age 6 to 12 to 18, it's a much safer sort of space, and there's a real camaraderie.
That's amazing. Kat, I know that Unilever has been involved with FIFA, with many of the leagues in the UK for a long time. Was there a pivotal moment where women's sports suddenly came to the forefront?
Yes, like if I sort of talk from the perspective of Rexona, I think it kind of all started from the brand proposition. So Rexona, for anyone that doesn't know, it's the world's biggest deodorant. And we've got a purpose, which is to inspire the confidence in everyone to move. And that's sort of at the heart of what we do as a brand. We give the confidence to move, we stop the sweat and odor that gets in the way, but we're inspiring people to move. And when you look at it, you say, okay, everyone, who is the everyone? Where are the barriers? Who isn't moving, or what's holding them back? And that's where you start looking at groups of people all around the world. And obviously gender, and females in particular, is one big group, huge group, where it's not equal. And so that's sort of the start point of why we decided this is an area we need to really champion. We were already working with some big football clubs, so Chelsea, Man City. We work with some of the biggest football ambassadors in the world, but we've sort of notched it up now, partnered with FIFA, with UEFA, with CONMEBOL, with CAF, the Confederation of African Football as well. And so basically to drive this change around the world. And I'd say the other point, as this sort of leading brand in this space, we're the most global brand actually Unilever has. So our footprint is everywhere. So we can really try to champion this change, and pretty much getting women to an equal playing field is almost a common denominator across most of the world of where we need to drive the change.
That is And when I think about Ally, Bridget, yours is a leadership team full of strong women and women who are passionate about sports. Did it start from the top? Did it start from the beginning? Tell us a little bit about the Ally journey.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when we were first sort of becoming Ally, we were precluded from doing any sort of sponsorships. We were a TARP recipient, so coming out of the recession, we weren't actually allowed to do any sponsorships or anything that really just tied back to very specific business metrics until that money was paid back to the government. So it's just an interesting scenario that we were in. But 7 years into that rebrand, we like to say the handcuffs were taken off, and our first foray into sponsorships was really with motorsports, Hendrick Motorsports, some small things in the soccer space, but partnering with the NASCAR organization because it had that reach. The audience had that reach, and we needed that reach. We had to build that brand awareness, which we all know sponsorship does really well. But we're a diverse and inclusive company, and that's really that's our fundamentals. Like, that is what we are completely grounded and rooted in. And so it really wasn't a question of women's sports or not women's sports. It was just, when can we add women's sports to the portfolio? And that was really challenging for us because the reality was, one, the exclusivity that was surrounding women's sports made it impossible for us to get in. It was, the opportunities weren't there from a brand perspective to come in and actually sponsor a team or a league. It was very, very difficult. And the other piece of it is, as we're growing our portfolio, their coverage wasn't there. So then you're faced with all of the, off-peak time slots and low ad inventory and all that good stuff. But when the opportunity presented itself with the NWSL, we jumped on it. It was actually the third sponsorship that we added to the portfolio. So pretty early on in our sponsorship journey. And that was massive for us. And, as we got into our work with the NWSL, there's actually and I'm sure everyone in this room has heard of the abuse scandals that went on within the league and all of the turmoil that league has had to overcome. And a lot of brands were leaving. A lot of brands were completely abandoning the league. And these players were sitting here with, faced with the potential non-sustainable league. And so instead of leaving, we actually turned to the NWSLPA, the Players Association, and doubled down on an investment with the NWSLPA. And that gave us the ability to really listen to athletes and what they needed. And what we found was that, the biggest revenue driver in sports is media. And so that really challenged us to look at our media spend. And once we knew that, we could get coverage for women's sports, that a lot of these other problems, hopefully over time, will go away, but it starts with that investment. It starts with that coverage. And so we looked at our investment and realized how out of balance it was. And that's really what propelled us in women's sports. Was at that point in 2022, we actually made a commitment, and we call it our 50-50 pledge, where for every dollar that we spend in men's sports media, we will spend that same dollar in women's sports media. And we made that commitment to happen over 5 years purposefully, because we knew we couldn't do it alone. We knew that we needed media companies to come to the table and produce coverage and the other piece of it was the exclusivity issues. We had to figure out ways to knock down those walls. And we had to also figure out how to get around a lot of the low ad cost inventory and the off-peak time slots by doing really disruptive things. But that's really what propelled us into women's sports.
That's amazing. And I want to stick with that for a minute, Bridget, because it is an ecosystem approach that needs to be taken with regards to women's sports, right? When you think about that space, there are the leagues, there are the players themselves, there are the clubs, in some cases, there are advertisers and brands like yourself, and then there are the media partners, and the exposure and the coverage and the just the ability to elevate women's sports overall. So can you maybe continue to talk a little bit about how you went on that journey and what some of the key initiatives, and then I'd love to hear from Kat and Tom as well on that.
Yeah. So, I mentioned the biggest revenue driver in sports is media, but women were actually receiving less than 4% of that media coverage. How crazy is that? And I mean, today I think we're looking at a number around 15%, but that's really by and large because of emerging media platforms that are coming to the table. So actually athletes themselves, women athletes themselves, are creating their own media companies to talk about women's sports. Like, you're seeing it happen all over the place. It's absolutely incredible. But we were receiving less than 4% of it. And so that's really what charged us in that aspect. And so as soon as we made that pledge, we had to commit to it. So we had to get really scrappy and really, really disruptive. So what we started to do was kind of pick our lane, media equity, and we had to figure out, how are we going to do this? So the first step was we actually got with the NWSL, who was already our partner, and CBS, who was the media partner of the NWSL, and we said, we got to move the championship game to prime time, because every soccer game, as you guys probably see, especially in American soccer, it's like at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's absolutely ridiculous. You're never going to see a game. And so we worked with them, and we actually moved the 2022 NWSL championship to prime time. And that was the first time that a female sports championship game was ever played in prime time on broadcast TV. So that was wild. So we did that. 2022. Yeah. Oh, that was crazy.
I just want that to sink in for a minute, that 2022 was the first time a female championship game in the US was telecast in prime time.
Absolutely. And then we've gone on to do a couple of other things, but I think that's our mentality. Is the hard part is we can't just buy media. So we're trying to do really bold, disruptive brand acts in women's sports to actually move the needle and to create that talkability and continue that momentum. So we actually worked with Disney, who is another media partner of ours, and of course, alongside GroupM, with their help, working on a deal with the Atlantic Coast Conference and the women's sports within that conference, where we could actually, because this is a challenge we have in media in general, is you can't really direct your dollars into women's sports. That usually they'll go to men's, and women's is like an afterthought, or you don't really know where it's going. You don't know what content it's going to. So we were able to actually direct 90% of our investment into women's sports that way. So that was another big milestone marker that we kind of took on. And then, we've been just kind of slowly but surely really being strategic about portfolio partners that we've been adding. Just did a partnership with the Las Vegas Aces, and then also did a partnership with the USGA, both on the men's and women's side. Because I think I want to be clear, it's not a men versus women thing at all. It's a men and women thing, and I think we just have to be mindful of that equity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd probably pick up from that I think the start for us has been, or the big sort of shift for us has been the partnerships, because the partnerships themselves have their media channels. Together we can really drive the amplification. So selecting the partnerships that work both for men and for women. So FIFA would be a prime example, but then we double down on those female kind of big moments, and we put our money there. So I'd say like the Women's World Cup that's just been was a huge moment for us, where we amplified this with bold, disruptive acts in every single country that had teams that were playing. So really leveraging the power of that. Similarly with the football teams, we do the same. So use their channels and really drive, but with bold, disruptive content. We've also started partnering with, media owners and platforms. So we did a big partnership with TikTok. And so really going, who are we trying to talk to here, define the audience? And actually with the Women's World Cup, we wanted to talk to younger audiences. We wanted to get girls inspired to join the sport and to start participating. So the partnership with TikTok, daily content creation, pushing it out through their platforms, leveraging our ambassadors, who also are a channel in their own right, to really target young girls was another one. And also then moving into gaming, so Roblox. We also sort of decided, again, having started from the start point of our audience is to get young girls and boys inspired, but this specific was targeting young girls. We developed the first Rexona obby, who together with Roblox and FIFA World, we created a game. It was very much, we leveraged our ambassadors, so big names, Lauren James playing for the UK, Trinity Rodman, all of these names, we created their avatars. They then started playing. So really looking at where are the audiences, and let's get great creative out there that will reach them.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It's really important. I think we were presented with some statistics that said, 60% of the interest was generated by social media. So it's not non-live content. So we had to really look at Twitch, TikTok, and create, call it snackable, content that was generated by the players or the fans, and we could amplify that. And everything we do, we try to work out how it's going to be broken down and changed. It's not just the landscape versus portrait. It's just shorter. What's the medium? What are we using it for? Because we do need the broadcast numbers. So we've got a couple of networks that broadcast all the women's games, but we also need that relatability and that content. And actually fandom, in a previous talk, Rachel's not here, Rachel Lowenstein talked about fandom as a concept was actually created by girl culture. And so, that's how you mobilize around things. And so it's really interesting where fandom's gone with this. It's not just about the ritual of going to a game, but we do want audiences and families attending the matches. So that's clearly a measure of success. But it's really important to have the content tailored.
That's great to hear. And I think it's important to realize that as brands, as big, powerful brands, you bring that power with you to this space, and you're starting to shift the conversation. I'm sure for you individually, as professionals for your teams, this was not an easy path. There were a number of challenges that you must have faced internally and externally that could have at any point made it say, okay, goes into that too difficult bucket, but you didn't. And we are all, as all the women in this room, are very grateful for that. But I am keen to understand, are there any specific challenges that you would highlight or any advice that you would share with the audience in terms of how you overcame some of those challenges? Because we know we want more brands to play in this space. We also know it's not easy.
We didn't have any specific challenges. Maybe I should give it to Kath.
We should all move to Australia.
But no, there weren't any challenges around the decision, but there are challenges around measurement and being looking at how you measure things, because there's different measures of success. You'll get 4 million people watching a men's match. You'll get a smaller audience watching a women's match, but we can use things like, it's like when you do seen versus non-seen testing with advertising. Do you know what Net Promoter Score is? If everyone knows, Net Promoter Score is the most brutal measurement of, you're either an advocate if you give a 9 out of 10 when asked if you'd recommend, or you're a detractor if you're 6 or less. With our, when customers are aware of our AFL women's partnership, on average their NPS score is 21%, 21 points higher. So what that means is, it's not a coincidence, it's just when they're made aware of it, that all of those groups, they would tend to rate. So there must be something in that. It's more than just awareness. There's a consideration and a brand sentiment that's really beneficial to us. And we also want to measure, the other important things to show is measuring participation both in the administration and leadership roles. Are they umpires? Are they leading community groups? In the players? And we had a huge issue when the Women's League was created. Guess what? Hundreds of sporting locations didn't have female change facilities. So that was really interesting. So the bank worked with the state government. There had to be a lot of investment in the infrastructure, just basic things, just to get change rooms. So trying to put a different spin on things to show that the success of this can't be measured just on the same scale as men's.
I'd say probably 2 areas that I think we face some challenge. The first one, I'd say from a business point of view, does this partnership deliver a return on investment? Is it really worth investing in? And that actually will come from our sort of local teams. Can I shift as much stock with this partnership versus that? I'm in a live conversation now about the female Euros versus the male Euros, which one? But we proved it by doing it. So if we really focused on the Women's World Cup, as I mentioned earlier, with all the markets, and it drove significant growth, drove significant uplift in brand power and in competitive market share. So kind of we built the business case by doing it. I'd say the second challenge we face as a sort of global business is geographical. So the conversations I have every day differ by market. You've got some markets that are all in. So, Latin America, for example, never a debate. Let's go all in. It's to do with, how football is regarded. Conversations with sort of my teams in India, for example, were totally different. But actually, the reality is the impact you can make is even greater. 1% of girls play football in India. So, of course, the conversation is, this isn't relevant for us. It's like, no. This is the most exciting opportunity because you can come out with a bold point of view and really drive change, which also is the change the likes of FIFA want to drive. So I think actually the geographical challenges we were able to overcome by showing the possibility, and then the business challenges, frankly, by just doing it.
I mean, I'll just add really quick. It's this delicate balance of art and science, I think, that we wrestle with on a daily basis. It's because when we first started that 50-50 pledge, it didn't, like, we had to model it out to make sure that we could actually do it, but we couldn't technically predict like when it was actually going to pay off. And I think that's the challenge of it, is we knew that there would be outsized returns. We just couldn't at the beginning directly understand when that was going to happen. I think it took off way quicker than we expected it to, which was absolutely amazing. But you know, we still wrestle with like, what is that next big thing? Like, what is that next opportunity that we can do that's going to help change the industry? It's changed the women's sports industry. So actually, doing really big brand acts that'll help move it in the right direction. It's how do you sustain those big things?
That's so true, right? Because you don't want this to be a one-off. You don't want this to be just linked to specific sporting events, some of which happen annually or once in 2 years or once in 4 years. And this is a space where you've all spoken about how you've had to prove internally that it makes good business sense. It's not just about purpose or trying to do the right thing, but it's also a space where it's really important that brands show up in an authentic way. Because if not, it's very easy to sponsor something or slap a logo on something or spots and dots. So I'd love for each of you to talk a little bit about how do you ensure on an ongoing basis that that brands show up in this space, and what do you have to share with the audience in terms of advice of brands showing up authentically so that they can truly be a part of a movement and not just be sponsors?
I can take it. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, you go.
Yeah. No, okay. So I mean, I touched on earlier the purpose of the brand. So I think the start point really has to be, you know, does the brand have a credible role to play here? And to me, it starts with purpose. So if the brand's here to inspire the confidence in everyone to move, because the product has a role, then we should be showing up. So I think, first of all, have you got a credible voice? But secondly, I think it's very much about what you do as much as what you say. So we've put in place a grassroots program. We call it our Breaking Limits program. We've launched it now in over 6 markets, and it's continuing to grow. And it's a program where we partner with NGOs, with different charities on the ground, with schools now, to really try to inspire and to get young people into sport who actually might not have had the opportunity to. And by market, that differs in terms of what their barrier to sport was, what was getting in the way. But through doing that is kind of our grassroots program. We're kind of showing up authentically because we're kind of doing and we're saying, but the voice of what we're saying is to drive the amplification to show why this is important. So it kind of, the grassroots gives us the credibility, but also allows us then the voice, the bigger voice, to then follow through and to drive that change, to accelerate.
I'd piggyback off that. I mean, I think, you know, consumers are super smart. They're so smart. And they know when you're in it for yourself, and they know when you're in it for them. And I think that consistency in terms of investment is really important. You can't come in and out, especially in women's sports. You can't come in and out. You got to be in it for the long run. That's what's going to drive authenticity. I think that's just an extremely important thing to remember. You know, and I also think like you've got to figure out when you're aligning with your partners, like, do you guys have the same objective? Are your values aligned? Are you marching to the same North Star? Because if you're off in your silos and you're just kind of doing this for the brand, and then, you know, the NWSL is doing it for their brand, or the Aces are doing it for that brand, you gotta all be aligned, or that natural weave won't be there. You know, as a financial institution, I think for us it's important because our whole remit is really to change the trajectory of people's lives, make sure that there is an effect of a positive trajectory on people's lives. And so that financial aspect has to be there for us, and it has to be rooted in everything that we do. And that's how we make sure that we're coming across authentic as well.
Yeah, that long-term point is so important. And I think we have National Australia Bank is all about serving customers and helping communities prosper. And the thing about grassroots sport, and build on that, is that we've been a partner of Auskick for so long that now you've got players winning the MVP or they're the best player, and they talk about NAB Auskick. That's where they started, and their dad or their mum was, helping. And so we can be really authentic in how we engage with that, because also when someone wins the Rising Star of the Week, we can send a local banker out to the club, to their junior club from 10 years ago, and present a cheque, even if it's, a cheque that can buy, equipment and facilities. And so there's a really nice natural connection, because it's a lot of we're bank with hundreds of branches in regional communities, and often the people in those communities are building, running community things, and so there's a really nice engagement. But the Auskick thing also lends itself from Auskick right through to the big time. And so we had a campaign called Mini Legends, and you pick say 5 or 6 of the most recognisable players in the league, and whether it's the tattoos or the hairstyle or the way they are. And we had these little kids do these ads, and it was amazing, because players would ask their managers about, hey, can I be in the next year of, and when the women elite started, we had some fantastic women's players, Taylor Harris, Nina Morrison's got this amazing hairstyle. So you could do this amazing hair, and that was her, and everyone knew that was Nina Morrison. So it's amazing having household names that are women, and just naturally having them as the mini legends. So you might have, it was just such a natural thing. So I thought that was quite authentic. But we also can have engage the players, and to some extent the administrators, and showcase female coaches and umpires, and make sure they're doing some of the content. It feels really authentic, because you can just get them talking about what their day's like and get it shared.
I love this, right? Because from what you're all saying, it's so clear that across geographies and across sports, some of the fundamentals of how to be authentic in this space remain the same. You've all spoken about grassroots. You've all spoken about the consistency and being in it for the long term, making the names household names. So I think there are a lot of really interesting principles we can take out of this. And so as we start to wrap up this panel, I'm getting the signal of time. What I would love to do for a minute, though, is if we were sitting here together in 2 years' time on this stage, having a similar discussion, what do you hope we would be talking about then? What progress would you like to see in the next couple of years?
I love Bridget's point about the media and those sort of those commitments by other corporate partners. That's really bold what you did, and even if you put a time frame on it, you've got to get the opportunities to come. But I'd love to see more commitments like that, because I think a lot of the corporate partners need to get together when they are sponsors of a league, and there's enough movement to say, no, this needs to happen. I'd like to see the product a bit different. I think there's a lot of the broadcasters are looking into different camera angles, why does it have to be, why does the product need to be the same if the game is a little different, the way women play, the way they engage, the speed of it. So there might be a different nature of it. That'd be another good way to not be comparing. It's not like for like. And there's different ways and different fans. So I'd like to see the nature of the women's coverage, just be optimised, perhaps. And clearly there's some participation things. We want to go to 30% of girls in grassroots. We want to get more women, like I said before, in administration and leadership roles. That will be amazing. So just you can't be what you can't see. Classic.
Yeah, I mean, just building on it, I think from a broadcast point of view, I think it's critical, but that really will come when the demand is there. So I think we've got to, and that's the role of brands, or the role where brands can play a big role, is the partnerships to drive the demand to then push on. So the broadcasting, it just happens, and this flywheel will start going. So I think that's a big one. And for me, really, it is about participation. With stats like 68% of girls don't feel comfortable in these sort of, when they join the clubs and in movement spaces, there's stats all over the shop. Like, that just has to come down. And, if I then bring it right back to, even from a personal point of view, just to see the kids having equal opportunities to become future leaders, to enjoy teamwork, to win games, to lose games, to just be confident to do it, that has to change. And that's grassroots, that's schools, that's, it's a responsibility of everyone. So I think seeing that, making a seismic leap there, I think would be amazing.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm right there with both of you. I think, what you described, we have an internal word for it. We call it the vicious cycle. And it's, that brands aren't investing because the media companies aren't covering, and the media companies aren't covering because brands aren't investing. And it's translating to the poor time slots and the lower value for the leagues and the lower pay for the players. It's a mess. And so until we all start investing in it, it's not going to change. And so I think we're starting to see that happen. And I'm looking at players like Caitlin Clark in the US. And, I look back and years ago, with players like Sue Bird, and I'm like, if she had the coverage that Caitlin has today, like we would be there. The game is tremendous. The game hasn't changed. The game is amazing. It's just getting covered more, which is awesome to see. But I think in 2 years, we've got a lot of progress to make. I think it's going to take a while, but, I'd love to see more, female athletes kind of coming out of their sport and finding jobs in the business side of women's sports. Maybe coverage. I'm hoping to see more women athletes, or more women in general in the business world of sports covering it, because I think when women are telling the story, that narrative changes. And I think that's a fundamental thing that's needed for equity. So, my hope is in the next 2 years that, we make progress in all of these areas.
I've got to give a quick shout out to, this just reminded me about a really important point, is giving female athletes the flexibility they need. So the AFL have got this great program called Work Play, and the athletes can load up their profiles and starting with corporate partners, but any organisation can trawl through and have a look and put their jobs up. So we've actually got 5 women athletes working at NAB now. One of them's in marketing, and I spoke to her the other day and I said, they're getting into pre-season. What does that mean? It means he's got huge training blocks at the beginning, end of day, so they're working a compressed week. So I think another thing in a couple of years' time is more organisations and flexibility and hybrid working has lent itself, but it's got to be a really explicit commitment to recognise that for 10 years or as long as their career can go for, so that they've also got a career outside it. So that's a really big part of what a lot of good sporting codes are doing, is just making sure that athletes, men and women, but specifically women, can still be doing, educating and working. And so it's a shout out for that, because we're thrilled. Any of the players are such great leaders on the field. If you'd be so lucky to have them in your workforce. So we've got to get more of them in the workforce.
That is awesome. So I think Tom is like the walking, talking billboard for work and live in Australia.
This is vintage, season 2022. But that's the other thing, is all about getting merchandise that women.
He's even dressed for the occasion. Please explain the T-shirt.
Oh, so the T-shirt is, these are all the clubs, so in alphabetical order, from Adelaide, Brisbane, right down to the Western Bulldogs. And this was just a piece of merchandise that Cotton On, which is a sort of apparel partner, designed. And it's just, it just puts a slightly feminine or just a different spin on the classic, football things. So there's a lot of this stuff, and it's very cool. Brighter colours, more vibrant, all that kind of thing.
That is awesome. Well, I think we're wrapping up now, but thank you. A big thank you to Bridget, Kat, and Tom for this. I hope you all took a lot out of today. If nothing else, at least hopefully you remember that when you say football, depending on which part of the world you're in, it means something very different. So if somebody asks you to play football, first check where you are and what exactly they mean. The Gaelic version that Tom just mentioned is very, very interesting. But thank you all very much for a fantastic audience and a fantastic panel.